I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: is your age a social construct? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because there is a man in the Netherlands, Emil Ratelband is his name. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly, so apologies. He's 69 years of age, but he's taken a court case to try and get a new birthday for himself. Basically, he wants to be recognised as a 49-year-old with this new birthday instead of a 69-year-old because he thinks that will advantage him in society and with the ladies, and it just all round his life will be better if people actually accept this belief that he has that he's actually only a 49-year-old. Now, this guy is a bit of a known personality, a TV personality over there, so it's quite possible that this is a very, very clever piece of social theatre, that he's engaged in a very, very important object lesson, a piece of, like a satirical use of the courts, if you like. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, whether it's a waste of the court's time or not, but to try and highlight to his society some big problems that they might have around their approach to reality. Now, what's interesting about all of this is he's simply being consistent with a trend that we see growing within our society, particularly in some sectors, to try and suggest that reality is really nothing more than a social construct, that reality is not fixed, that there is no normal. Instead, you can claim whatever you want to be normal, and that we should all just accept that because reality is not fixed. Effectively, we invent our own reality. One of the very, very clear areas where this is becoming a growing trend is in the whole transgender ideology. This idea that your biological sex is not actually fixed, and it's not something that's determined by your physicality. So your masculinity or your femininity is merely a psychological belief you have about yourself. And so, therefore, you can be born with masculine genetics, masculine body, masculine physicality, but in actual fact, you're really a female because psychologically you believe yourself to be a female. And so the idea that somehow that reality would be fixed, you don't like the thing that you actually are, you don't believe the thing that you actually are, a male or a female, is true, so you will create your own new reality, and in that new reality, according to that which you psychologically believe about yourself, you are now the opposite thing. So if you were born male, in actual fact, if you believe otherwise, you can be a female, and that we should all embrace this distortion of reality, and we should embrace this idea of people inventing their own reality. Now, of course, the transgender ideology is completely contradictory. It is totally undermining logically in its fundamental premise. It's fatally flawed because what it's proposing is this, that your physicality has absolutely nothing to do with your maleness or your femaleness, that gender is a pure social construct and that biological sex apparently is something separate. But here's the thing, if that's really true, then you shouldn't need to actually change your physicality in any way in order to change your gender. But that's exactly what happens when people, quote unquote, change their gender. So someone who was born a male and says, well, in actual fact, I'm a female, they don't just announce to the world, hey, I'm a female. They now go about presenting themselves physically in the world as if they are a female. Sometimes they will go as far as to have gender reassignment surgery. They will actually scar their own bodies and change their genitalia in order to embrace this constructed reality they have. But here's the thing, like I said, that's contradictory, because if gender is truly nothing more than a social construct and it has absolutely nothing to do with your physicality, then you shouldn't need to change your physical body in any way in order to change your gender. It's an irrelevant thing. You can't change a social construct with a scalpel. So it's a totally contradictory position, but still there are people who insist on embracing this idea that individuals can construct their own reality in this way. But in order to embrace that idea, you've actually got to believe that there is no normal, there is no reality that is fixed. It's up to the individual to decide. Now, I would say there's a big problem with that. And this is not simply a matter of saying, oh, well, who are they hurting? Just let them do what they want to do. It's really a whole society, and the ability to form meaningful community in a society is dependent upon one very, very important foundation that everything sort of begins with and flows out of. And that is that first underlying a priori assumption that reality is a fixed thing. We have a shared vision of reality. That's how we can form meaningful community. But if everyone is constructing their own individual version of reality, it is impossible for us to come together in any way other than what you would probably call a substandard version of community. Effectively, you have to create a world in which we can't really truly commune anymore because we don't have that shared vision of fundamental reality. Instead, what we do is we come together and we merely tolerate each other. We tolerate the fact that we all have different constructed realities. But that is not a recipe, as I said, for meaningful communion. Communion is about connecting with person in a profound and deep way, and that can only really begin to happen when we have this beginning point of a shared and fixed view of reality. So it just destroys societal community. Now, the other thing that's interesting, I think, about what Emil Ruttelband is doing here is the way in which he's actually highlighting this obsession that we have in our culture with youth and vitality and the fact that we elevate it above aging and the wisdom of age that comes along with it. And he's not wrong. I know in my country, for example, there is a growing problem with older people, and they're not even people who are in retirement years. They're probably 20 years shy of retirement years, and they struggle to get in the door for job interviews if they put their age on their CV because they just immediately, people look at the age and assume that they've got nothing to offer because there's this sort of underlying societal assumption that youth and vitality is the way to go. And you see this everywhere, not just in job-seeking arenas. It's a very, very common problem. The way that we don't value our elderly and even the state in life of being elderly. Just look at a lot of movies now that present, mainstream movies, and the way they present the elderly state of life. One of the most common tropes now you see in those sorts of films is elderly people who don't actually act like elderly people. Instead, they act like adolescent, immature teenagers, and this sort of adolescent, immature, teenage way of behaving on the part of elderly people is sort of held up. Even if it's only subtly, it's held up as this is how you have a meaningful and full life. And it's like this idea that we've neglected or we're trying to throw off and treat being elderly and being older and experiencing that state of life and the way in which things begin to slow down and change for us. We're not promiscuous teens. We're not immature teenagers anymore. We don't go running around trying to party it up. But in actual fact, there's a reason for that. We're growing into a different state of life, and there's the maturity and the wisdom that comes from that. Now, if we try and construct our society around this whole absurd idea, and by the way, other great societies that have gone by the wayside have fallen into the same trap towards the end of their societies as well. This sort of decadence that leads to an obsession with youth and vitality and youthfulness. If we try and construct our society in that way, then we're going to be in real trouble because we are robbing ourselves of the maturity and the wisdom and the stateliness, if you like, that comes from elderly people who have embraced the wisdom, the maturity, the fullness of life experience that is being elderly, and in turn, obviously, they find themselves reciprocated and received into the community as full and not just respected, but highly respected members of the community. They've fought wars, they have trod paths that we have not trod. And so they deserve a level of respect for what they have contributed and given to us as a society. But sadly, it seems that has been eroded. And so Emil Ruttelband here, I think, is really highlighting something I suspect it's probably going to be missed in the milieu of all the tabloid sensationalism that the media is going to focus on in regards to this issue. But it's a really, really important point, and it's worth asking ourselves, are we becoming dumbed down? Are we becoming less wise and more immature as a society precisely because we don't actually value the wisdom of those senior years and that state in life, and we don't actually celebrate that aspect of the human experience anymore? We try and treat it as a curse that needs to be fled from at 100 miles an hour. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the video description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.